So iRacing, the platform that has positioned itself as the most ultimate, hardcore, true-to-life sim racing experience that you can have, has released a car that doesn't exist, has never existed, never will exist. So what's going on? Okay, so if you're asking the same question as me, or if you're if you've just clicked on this video, you'd understand exactly what it is that I am talking about, and it is the Dallara IR-01, which is an open wheel race car which has been developed in conjunction with Dallara specifically for iRacing. So just looking at the car, just trying to understand a little bit about what it is. I'm going to answer a couple of questions in this video really, and the first one is going to be what the car actually is, secondly what the purpose of it is, and thirdly should you buy it. It's going to be sort of a little bit more in-depth worth your money video, which I've done a few of now for some of the iRacing content that's come out. So this car, just looking at it, appears to be a very modern looking open wheel race car. No head protection, interestingly, which obviously you don't need in the sim world, and the only real thing that it does give you in the sim world is a central spar that you can't see past, with impairs your vision. So I guess there's a good reason for not including that. But just looking at the car, very modern sort of shape to it. Going from the back, of course, there's the very large rear diffuser that you'd expect, and there's also the rear wing that you sort of has got that kind of GT, well, very similar in the way it's supported to the way that a modern GT rear wing is supported, where the struts actually sort of come up and attach to the top of the wing, and the wing's sort of hung underneath those. I believe there's some sort of aerodynamic advantage to that, which for whatever reason IndyCar, Formula 1 don't seem to take advantage of. It seems to be very much a GT related thing. So they've gone for that with the large rear diffuser. The back end of it actually is a little bit more bulky than a modern day Formula 1 car, suggesting that, this car's got a normally aspirated V10 in it, virtually of course, and they seem to have very much designed the car around those dimensions so that it's actually plausible that a real life version of the V10 would be able to fit inside that bodywork, I guess is what I'm saying. So it's much sort of chunkier at the rear end than a modern day Formula 1 car, which tapers back to almost nothing down there now with the much smaller engines that they run today. So moving a little bit along further than that, the airbox actually seems quite small compared to Formula 1 and any sort of other open wheeler that you're aware of. It does seem quite small, doesn't seem to rise very high, and it's certainly right on the limit there in terms of the rule that generally governs open wheel car construction, that says that the driver's head has to be beneath a straight line drawn from the front of the cockpit to the roll hoop, and definitely very, very borderline in that area. And then as it sort of comes down to the nose, it's got a very modern Formula 1 style nose on it, I suppose, with a little bit of a narrower front wing. Now, one of the things that they've claimed about this, so we don't really know until we get into the racing how it's going to be, but they say that the cars are going to follow closely to each other quite well, better than a modern day Formula car tends to. And that kind of stands at odds with the way that they described the way in which this car was developed. It was developed with all the CFD and everything that Dallara can bring to the table, and designed that it could be a real life car. They could take what they've done here and develop it into a real life race car that could potentially race. Everything on it would work as it does in the sim, apparently. However, they do also say that these cars are going to follow one another quite well. Now, I'm not sure if that's just something that they're going to be coding into the software, because there's nothing about looking at that car that suggests to me, a layman who is not an aerodynamicist, But there's nothing looking at that car that would suggest that it's going to follow overly well if you were to race that car in real life. I mean, it's got the big rear wing and the big diffuser at the back, which creates the dirty air, as we know, and it relies on a big front wing for its front grip, which, as we all know, gets disturbed by dirty air. So I can only imagine that this car's ability to follow, if it follows other cars quite well, is down entirely to the way that they've developed a little workaround in the software coding. So I'm not sure how realistic that in particular is. Perhaps if you're an aerodynamicist, you could look at this car and explain to me why it follows quite well, but I find it a little bit unusual that a problem that Formula One's been trying to solve for around about 20 years has been solved in 6 months by Dallara and iRacing. So make of that what you will. But I really guess that the only way to find out more about this car is to take it for a drive, which is what I'm going to do now. So we've got obviously the naturally aspirated V10 engine, which I mentioned. Limited electronics is what they've advertised it with, so I'm assuming it's not going to have traction control or ABS or anything. But we will jump into the car, take it for a few laps, and see how it goes. Okay guys, so here we are in the cockpit of the IR-01. Just brought it here to Interlagos, which is a track I know reasonably well. Driven it on a number of sims across the years. Not so much at iRacing actually, but there is a standard setup for this car for this track, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to have a bit of a run around here. Now the first thing is, I suppose, the cockpit. You can see that there's a kind of a sort of an aero screen or a little windscreen thing up, sort of very high by comparison to modern race cars, which tend to have quite a small one. And it actually, as you can see there and there, it actually wraps all the way around. So that's a little bit different. Modern steering wheel, as you can see, sequential gearbox, everything else. So not a whole lot that's unusual. Got the big V10 engine behind us, so let's get out there, run a couple of laps and see what this thing drives like. So of course we've only got the stock standard setup on here. I think it's full of fuel as well, so it's not going to be earth-shatteringly quick. And I will admit I have done a few sighting laps just earlier on in a practice session at Spa. Wasn't overly quick there. I know I'm still giving up a lot of time under brakes, but it's almost like the brakes, you need to brake that late, you almost haven't got time to get down the gears, which is something I'm struggling with. But now the first thing that will sort of notice is the sound of the engine, the V10. It's a bit weird to hear. I actually found it a little bit sort of jarring to sort of hear this engine note coming out of a car with quite a modern shape on it. You sort of realise that it's been sort of 15, 20 years since we've heard this kind of engine sound, and it really did sound a bit old to me. I had a few people, like on the forums, they're always whinging about something and complaining about the sound of the engine from in the cockpit here. Honestly, I don't know what they expect, because this is, if you watch any of the onboard from the race cars of the time, which actually ran these engines, this is pretty much exactly what they sounded like. You don't get the exhaust note when you're in front of the engine, you're not sitting right behind the exhaust. It's kind of a vibration sound. I heard somebody say, oh, it sounds like a Prius. Well, find me a Prius that sounds like this and I'll buy it. I'm not great in open wheelers generally, and I'm finding this one a challenge. I was quite slow in the practice session earlier on today, and was just using the stock setup, of course, but just how quick you have to do everything is a lot different to, I mean, normally I drive the stock cars, so a lot different to what I'm normally used to. There's also been a few people saying that this car wanders a bit down the straights, like it's not steady on the straights. I'm not finding any of that. I'm not really sure what they're talking about, to be honest.
Had a few people saying about how the steering of the car binds up in the fast corners, it's difficult to hold on to. That is absolutely true. A high downforce car like this with big wings and everything like that, no power steering, is going to bind up in the fast corners because the weight of the downforce pushes down onto the car. If you can kind of picture doing that with a model car or something like that, if the wheels are turned, it's going to want to try and push those wheels straight, and that's exactly what you're feeling when it binds up in the turns, so that's realistic. There are loads of Assetto Corsa mods for old Formula 1 cars from the 90s, 80s, stuff like that, has exactly the same effect. The steering will bind up when the loads get high through the fast corners. Of course, you don't feel it when you're on the straights. But I'm certainly not feeling at one with this thing, but it's good fun, no traction control. It's got a lot of power there, but it's not uncontrollable, certainly not with the stock setup. I'm sure you can make it uncontrollable. And I know I'm leaving a lot on the table under brakes. I'm just not able to keep up with it quite yet. Like there, for example, I could probably brake 20 metres later there. Have to do a few races with this car while the hype is still around. I'm sure I'll get run into because that's just the nature of official racing, especially in week 13, but I would like to get the opportunity to find out how this thing actually runs in traffic. But the lack of traction control, the lack of ABS, the lack of having to manage any kind of hybrid system, it's quite enjoyable. It is quite a fun car to drive. It's difficult, but it is a fun car to drive. I really like it. Even just lapping it on your own is quite enjoyable, but you've really got to, at least as far as I can figure, you've really got to wrestle it in order to get the best lap time out of it. You've got to hustle it. It's a bit of a beast. There's an apex there somewhere. Yeah, you can see I'm not really in danger of breaking any lap records here, but we're only out here as give it a go, give you a bit of an idea about what the car's like. Might need to turn my force feedback down for this, it's quite brutal. Already my wrists and forearms getting sore. Go for one more lap. I thought that to myself a couple of laps ago. But it is fun. Yeah, I forget I've got a 7th gear. Double shifted. But yeah, there's a few people online sort of having a moan about the handling and everything else. I'm not finding it. I'm not understanding what they're mad about. I think everybody just likes something to complain about, and they're probably people who've never really looked into what a car like this is actually supposed to be like. But I'd be tending to trust Dallara over certainly some of the opinions you find out there. Alright, so there we go. So that was a few laps in the IR-01. So I guess now the only thing really left to do is to jump out and it's verdict time. Okay, well there we go. So we've actually taken the car for a few laps now and got a little bit more of an understanding about what it's like and what it's going to race like. Obviously, lapping on my own doesn't really tell me what it's going to be like in traffic, but certainly a good experience being able to sort of take that car out and give it a few laps. But all right, so what we've got to move on to now is to understand a little bit about why iRacing have done this, because it's quite a departure for them from a group which has always prided itself on authenticity and being true to life, to go out and produce a car and put it in the sim. That just, it doesn't exist. I mean, having a look at the way that the inverted commas windscreen wraps around the cockpit there, you kind of even doubt whether the driver would be able to put his hands there to assist him getting in and out of the car. So there are a couple of things that may not necessarily be things which are workable in the real world. So why have they decided to do this? And one of the things in the launch video that Steve Myers, because I had Steve Myers, who, if you don't know, is the president of iRacing, and he was actually talking about how there was demand for a top-end open-wheeler race car, and they've made this car to satisfy that demand. I'm not buying that for a second, really. I'm not aware that there's been any demand for a high-level open-wheel race car in iRacing ever. They've got Formula 1 cars. They've got a McLaren, a Williams, which were current at the time they were made, and they've built a couple of historic ones as well. They've got the current IR-18 Indy car in there, and they never get a lot of participation, any of them. There's never a top-level open-wheel race car that's proved popular on iRacing. People like to drive the Skippy. They like to drive the Formula 3. They like to drive the Mazda. They like to drive the street stock and the truck. They like things that are slow and easy to drive, because most people who play iRacing, they're not super serious about it. They get home from a day at work, they want to jump on and have a couple of races before dinner. Most people aren't sitting around practicing and wanting to get to master a car such as this one. Therefore, they stick to the easy stuff. So, knowing this, and knowing that there's going to be a significant portion of the player base that will not touch this car because it's not a real-life car, they're going to turn their noses up at it. Why have they gone to all the trouble of making this? And I think I understand why. And to actually do that, you have to understand a little bit about where iRacing currently sits with its World Championship. They've already announced that this is going to be the car that the iRacing World Championship is going to be run with. And I think that really tells you the true purpose of this car. This car exists to give iRacing a stable World Championship platform that they can use year after year after year until whenever they decide to update it. And there's not going to be any talk about how close to real life it is. You remember earlier on in the year with the pandemic, we had a whole bunch of pro real life drivers, particularly on the Indy side, jump into iRacing's version of the car and just go, guys, this is nowhere near, until iRacing kind of shut that down and decided to move those conversations behind closed doors. Granted, just as a little bit of caveat for that, I suppose that they were running fixed setups as well, which means the drivers weren't able to tweak the cars as they liked them. But either way, there seem to be some issues with that. So in this case, it's not something that they're forever going to be tweaking to try and make it mimic a real-life counterpart, because there isn't one. And
the other good thing about it is if you look at the history of the iRacing World Championship, they used to run it for the Formula One car, and those Formula One cars, the Williams and the McLaren, getting very, very long in the tooth now. And I'm not sure if it may have been they haven't updated it. And I'm not really sure if there was some sort of issue with the new Codemasters contract that they may have signed with Formula One in making their F1 series of games, whether they got a more strict contract in terms to their exclusive rights of the cars, or whether iRacing wasn't able to get access to the level that they wanted to a Formula One car in order to construct it. I'm not sure what the scenario was, but either way, they haven't updated their Formula One cars. They ran the World Championship for Porsches, and Porsches really it's in iRacing as the Porsche Cup cars in iRacing as a C-class car, and not really something that you consider to be appropriate for running a World Championship with. As good as those cars are, certainly not having a go at the Porsche Cup car. It's very well done, but that's essentially why this car exists, is so iRacing have a stable platform which they own all the licensing to. They're not going to lose the license. They're not going to have the real life owners of this car withdraw the license and everything else. Perhaps the only one that could do that is Dallara. And at the end of the day, if iRacing actually commissioned and paid for this and bought this from Dallara, it's their property anyway, and I imagine they probably have done that. But yeah, they're going to own this, so they're not going to lose access to this car. They're not going to have to mess around with it. It is just a virtual race car of itself that they're going to be able to run their World Championship with. And that's why it exists, in my view. I don't think it's got anything to do with some sort of demand from the player base, because I'm just not seeing it, personally. So, does that mean that this entire car is basically the premise is a fraud? They've coded in unrealistic things to it in terms of the following ability and everything else. Does that mean it's best to just avoid the thing and it's a bad idea and everything about it's terrible? I don't think it is. I think that this car is going to be brilliant, and I'll tell you why. Because all the cars that are in iRacing so far are based, they're trying to be as close as they possibly can to a real life racing car. And they're never gonna do that. Alright, certainly not with the level of technology we currently have. They're always going to be a little bit off. And look for no other reason than the fact that, for example, in NASCAR racing, we don't have a proper side drafting aero model to it. The way that the aero works is not the way it works real life. For the simple reason, look at the size of a computer that you need to run a state-of-the-art wind tunnel. Now compare that to your home PC. And the state-of-the-art wind tunnel only needs to compute the airflow around one car, not 40 cars in a dynamic environment where the wind is blowing and everything like that. And to think that your home PC is going to be able to run a program which is continuously calculating fluid dynamics around 40 cars on a racetrack is just not going to happen. That is fantasy. That is many, many years away yet before we're going to get to that stage. So from that perspective, iRacing and any sim that you happen to pick up is always going to be playing catch up in that regard. There's always going to be little pieces from real life missing. And as they try and code all of this stuff in there to mimic real life as closely as possible, you also get the real life drawbacks. The things about the cars, be it an aero issue or something else, that stops them racing well. Look at Formula One, where guys can't get close to each other without DRS. Look at the current NASCAR package, where people are complaining that they can't follow, which is absurd for a stock car, but that's another discussion. So what we have here is a car that's been designed from the virtual ground up to be something that is, to be a concept that is perfectly possible to recreate in real life, but it is being designed as a sim racing car. So what you're using it for, or the player, the end user, what they're going to be using it for, is exactly what it's been designed for. You're not picking up something which is trying to imitate something else. This just is what it is, and it's going to do that job perfectly. This car is going to give us a fantastic and entertaining World Championship next year. It's going to be brilliant. So does that mean that you should rush out and buy it? No. No, it doesn't. And the reason that I say that, I mean, I've bought this car because I have been on iRacing a long time. I've got many people that I know very well from my time racing. I also run a league, so I've got quite a lot of reach throughout that. And I know that if I want to get a bunch of guys together and have a race with this car, I can do it. If this car, if right now, after I finish making this video, I wanted to just get out there on Facebook or wherever and say, hey, guys, I'm doing a race for this tonight, I know I'd get a field. And I know I could have a good race with it. And if you've got access to something like that too, then go for it. Honestly, go for it. But this car is not going to have long-term official participation. It's just not. As we talked about before, there's a significant portion of people who are going to turn their noses up at it because it's not a real car. And high-powered open-wheelers on iRacing aren't popular anyway. And they never have been. And there's no reason to suggest that this is going to be any different. I imagine that we're going to get a really good, I guess in that initial hype period when the car first comes out, we're going to get a lot of participants to the official races, and that's absolutely fantastic if you like driving around with a bunch of bandwagoners who don't know where the breaking point is, and you just want carnage, and you're quite happy to get involved in all that kind of stuff, then go for your life. And as I always say, again, if you've got a league that's going to run it, great, fantastic, go do it. But if you're just out there racing official, honestly, unless you're happy to only get a few weeks use out of a car, it's not going to be something you're going to get long-term participation in. This time next year, these races, even in peak times, are going to be lucky to be going official. That's my personal prediction on it. It's just the way with these high-powered open-wheeler cars that they just don't hold their participation because people go back to the easier-to-drive cars, what they know. They don't want to put in the practice to master something like this. They just don't. This isn't a jump on when you get home from work car. This is a put in your practice, put in your time, and get proficient car. And those kind of cars outside of the league sphere or the World Championship sphere are not popular. So that's it. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this one. Agree, disagree, let me know. If you're an aerodynamicist and couldn't in any way explain to me how this car would be good in dirty air, please do so. I'd be really keen to know. I'm interested in that kind of stuff, and I think that perhaps there are some people watching that are interested in that as well. But that's basically it from me. Those are my impressions. So let me know what you think, and we'll see you next time.